Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week portion, Devarim, is the beginning of the book of Devarim. Devarim in English we call Deuteronomy. I always love to come to this portion. I love to come to this portion because for the first time over a 40-year narrative, we get to hear Moses speak for himself. He speaks to the Israelites as they are preparing to cross the Jordan River in his own voice. And we hear how he summarizes for this generation the experiences of the past 40 years, the highs and the lows, the struggles, as well as the blessings and God's protective care. And he shares with them a little bit of his own sense of himself as a leader and of his experience having led them. Abraham Joshua Heschel, in his first major published work, The Prophets, takes the perspective of the prophet's own experience of having been called, having been unable to avoid responding to God's call, having accepted responsibility to speak for God and to say some difficult things, some harsh words, and also some comforting words. What was it like to be one of them? This is Heschel's perspective, and it's really very eye-opening because it clues us in. It draws our attention to these literary characters as human beings, and so it is with Moses. There's a fairly recent trend for some historians of looking at the emotion of a particular time, of an era, of the people who were the movers and shakers in that era. What did they feel? How did they experience events? And what drove their responses? Whether they were angry, whether they were in pain, whether they were joyful and celebratory. What was it like for them? Because some of their personal feelings surely influenced their actions and their words. We know that Moses begins by saying, I objected when God called me because I'm not a man of words. But he has demonstrated over and over again through these experiences of leadership that he can be very eloquent and that he can speak and speak effectively, that he can touch the people, and that he can also touch God on the people's behalf. And he does recognize, as we begin this final book of the Torah, that he has learned how to handle words, how to speak. And the word Devarim means words. It has other meanings, but a davar is a word, as in a devar Torah. This is a word of Torah. And he also says he understood fairly early the burden, the stress of having to lead these people. And he says, how can I bear you? How can I bear the burden of you and the troubles that you experience? How can I lead you? How can I cope? We might read between the lines and say, how can I do this job without going crazy? But he shares that with us. He shares his sense of aloneness, but also his sense of recognizing that he is doing something incredibly important to mold these people into a nation, and that he is learning each and every day how to do it better. and he knows that he cannot do it alone. We remember back in the book of Exodus, after the people had left Egypt, that Moses' father-in-law comes to him and says, Moses, what are you doing, sitting all day, hearing all of this kvetching and whining, all of these complaints? You need to delegate. And he does. And here in Deuteronomy, Moses reframes that delegation. And yes, he takes ownership for having done it. And he also tells us that God told him as well that it was a good idea. He has learned so much in this life. And here we get to hear his own voice. For me as a Jew, for me as a human being, for me as a person in a particular position of responsibility, it's nice to hear Moses speak for himself. It's nice for him to take this opportunity to summarize, to remind all of the Israelites where they came from, what they have been through, what they should have learned, as well as how it should have prepared them for the next phase of their national life, because they will be a nation. We know that the book of Deuteronomy contains many, many mitzvot with a focus on people's behavior within a society, people's behavior within a holy society, how to be responsible neighbors, responsible individuals, what today we would say, how to be a mensch. The focus of Deuteronomy is not just to summarize and for Moses to have the opportunity to bless the people and bid them farewell, but also he's taking stock of his own life, of his own experiences. He is taking the opportunity to share with the people a little bit of who he is. This is a wonderful message. And I want to share with you a poem by Rick Lupert, who is a poet who writes about prayer and who writes about Torah, who writes about the weekly parshiot. And Lupert begins by quoting this verse from chapter 1 of Deuteronomy. How can I bear your trouble, your burden, and your strife all by myself? And as a poet, he responds, it takes a village. It takes a shtetl. It takes two or more. It takes divine intervention. It takes 39 years in the desert. It takes a population explosion of complainers. It takes the words of a spiritual. It takes men appointed over men, appointed over men. It takes wise men. It takes men you know. It takes an acknowledgement that it takes women. It takes ancient cities on today's maps. It takes commands. It takes the memory of mountains. It takes a vanquished enemy. It takes verbal acknowledgement. It takes lawyers. It takes not playing favorites. It takes leadership training. It takes all the things you should do. It takes the right order of the right words. It takes righteous words. It takes 5 books. It takes 10 more chapters. Before you leave the fantasy novel of our past, before you enter the archaeology of our past, before the promised land has its golden age, before it all goes to Sheol again, you cannot do this alone. The trouble, the burden, the strife. Do not do this alone. You'll fall apart. A lovely poem with that message that encompasses so much of what Moses wants to say, what Moses says for pretty much the first time to us, the reader, the future generations, those who did not stand at Sinai or on the steps of Moab, on the shore of the Jordan River. It says to us, you can't do it by yourself. It takes everybody. It takes good intentions. It takes a sense of belonging and a sense of not just belonging, but a sense of peoplehood, an identity that is not purely individual. It takes the Jewish people for each of us to be Jewish. In Pirkei Avot, we are taught that it is not for each of us to complete the work alone, but none of us is free to abstain from doing our part. It takes all of us, no matter how great a leader we have, and Moses is our greatest prophet, our most brave and caring, modest, devoted teacher. Where would we be without Moses? So I want you, I hope that you will, as we study through the book of Deuteronomy, the last of the 5 books of Torah, that you will think about Moses as a real person, that you'll think about Moses as a teacher, as a guide, that you will think about his stresses, his humility, his courage, and his love for the Israelites and for God. Shabbat Shalom.